Can we take our seats, please? There's some seats in here, so you can come and be restful when you listen. I'd like to welcome you here, Stevens, and welcome those also that they're listening on the live webcast of this event. My name is George Korfiatis, and I'm the Provost and University Vice President here at Stevens. And this is a great event. So all of us who were here, especially in New Jersey, during the Superstorm Sandy, perhaps specifically those that were in Hoboken during that period of time, experienced the serious impact caused by the widespread disruption of critical infrastructure and especially our communications functions. I had the good fortune of being the commander of our emergency management team here on campus. And I say the good fortune because they're telling me that this was a once-in-a-lifetime event, and I don't have to do it again. So it was indeed a once-in-a-lifetime experience. We lost power for 8 days here on campus. The fact that we did not lose our critical communications function was not because of the elegant design of our communication networks, nor its resiliency. It was simple. It was pure luck. And we had to care for the safety and well-being of about 1,200 students on our dormitory facilities, 400 of which were in rented apartments in the back of town, which remained flooded for 6 days. Our IT infrastructure came to the point to depend on our staff charging battery packs and remotely and bringing them back and forth to keep critical nodes going. We were routinely putting out at least 3 communications per day to more than 5,000 students and their families, some of them as far away from here as China. I just can't imagine how it would be if we were unable to have our communications infrastructure up. However, much of Hoboken, as well as countless communities throughout the tri-state area, fared much worse. When disaster struck, our failure to protect our critical infrastructure, and especially communications networks, put citizens in danger, impeded emergency efforts, and slowed up the recovery efforts. At Stevens, our mission is to contribute solutions to serious global problems through technology-centric research and education. It is therefore our honor to host this important event organized today by the Federal Communications Commission and to welcome FCC Chairman Julius Janikowski for the second time on campus, I think, right? Welcome back, Chairman. And our other distinguished guests on campus. With the help of a notable panel of experts, from scientists and engineers to wireless providers to public officials to emergency personnel, this hearing opens a critical dialogue about national communication and connectivity issues exposed by the storm that we just had. In the next couple hours, our hope is to uncover some innovative ways to strengthen and improve network resiliency for the next time we face a crisis of this magnitude. I'd like to extend a special welcome again to the FCC Chairman, Janikowski, and the 3 FCC Commissioners in attendance, Mignon Clyburn, Jessica Rosenwasser, and Ajit Pai. Welcome to Stevens. I also like to personally welcome our own Mayor of Hoboken, Don Zimmer. I say a couple of words under the mayor's tenure as Don's tenure as a mayor of Hoboken. Stevens and the and our city have had a tremendous partnership. And it is really magnificent to see how the storm brought the community together and strengthened the partnership. So I think Don is going to have some remarks for you. So Don Zimmer, the mayor of Hoboken.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Chairman Januszkowski and commissioners, and Stevens faculty I know is here, and students, and thank you so much to the panelists who are here, and I know that there's many members of the public, including members of our CERT team who are here with us. We really appreciate you being here. Again, I'm Mayor Dawn Zimmer, and it's an honor to welcome you, all of you, to Hoboken. And I want to thank Stevens for hosting us, Stevens students for the phenomenal volunteering that they did through the storm. And I want to thank the commissioners and the chairman so much for holding these hearings to learn about the communications problems that arose as a result of Superstorm Sandy. I'd like to briefly highlight some of the challenges that we faced here in Hoboken. When Sandy hit, the Hudson River flowed into Hoboken from both the north and the south. This was unprecedented. It's never happened before. Flooded more than half of the city, including 3 of our substations, leaving more than 90% without power. Communications under these circumstances was an enormous challenge. We continued to use our website, email, and text blasts and press releases to try to get information out to our community. Social media proved to be incredibly helpful. In just the first week after Sandy struck, we sent out more than 500 tweets answering residents' individual concerns and quashing so many rumors that were flying all over the place. And we did the same through Facebook. But soon after we lost power, cellular access was spotty at best, and in many cases, non-existent. At times, my staff had to drive to the other end of town, where we knew there was better reception, just to update our website and to send out a press release. Phone calls from cell phones were almost out of the question. Text messages sometimes eventually went through, and all but one of our landlines in our emergency operations center stopped working at some point. Residents on the few blocks that did have electricity, we want to thank them for stringing out their power strips on their stoops and so their neighbors could come and charge up their cell phones. Some were trapped inside their homes by the flooding, managed to charge their phones in their cars and their garages. And those that were able to reach thousands who somehow found a way to get online. For many, phone and text and internet access were no longer options. Thousands were, so we had to get back to basics, like all forms of, even though there was a lot of media attention on Hoboken, to reach half of our town, we had to very much get back to basics. So on a daily basis, we had, thanks to the coordination with the CERT team and Stevens volunteers, we had hundreds of volunteers going out, posting daily updates in English and in Spanish throughout the city. We placed a big whiteboard that was constantly updated in front of City Hall. And then we also had using markers to write on store windows or glass, the sides of bus shelters. We had volunteers acting as runners to update 10 different board locations throughout the city. At my director's meeting this morning, we were talking about the possibility of a board that could be powered by solar power that could be, sort of updated. But that was what we had to go back to the basics of just being able to give people, literally a place to look and see the update. And I did updates every day in front of City Hall, and we would have hundreds of residents coming to receive an update, both for the residents and for the press. We also had challenges with our emergency communications networks. At one point, PSE&G advised me they were about to power up one of the substations, and I got a call from my fire chief saying, Mayor, the 911 system is down. I had to call back PSE&G immediately, saying hold off until further notice, and it took about an hour to get the 911 system back up and running so that we could then energize the substation. But it was a major concern that there could potentially be fires and we would have no way of knowing it. Obviously, as many of you know, I'm sure that there's an increased chance of fires as those substations are powered back up. I'm extremely thankful that through this storm, despite these enormous challenges that we faced because of the first responders, the CERT team, Stevens volunteers, and volunteers throughout the community, we had over 5,000 volunteers, that we were able to keep everyone safe in Hoboken. And so I really, really appreciate this panel coming together and the chairman organizing this so that we can look more deeply at what can be done to improve the communications for the future. I mean, it was a major risk, but luckily for Hoboken, we did not lose any of our residents, but there was definitely a risk out there, and I look forward to hearing this panel discussion and hope that going forward changes will be made so that in the future, as we face these storms again in the future, we will be able to keep our community safer. Thank you very much.
Chairman of the FCC, Julius Janikowski.
Thank you, everyone, and welcome to the third panel of our hearings today on lessons to be learned from Sandy and how to ensure the reliability and resilience of our communications networks. We had two panels this morning across the river in Manhattan, and we're very pleased to be here now in New Jersey for what my colleagues and I are sure will be a productive session this afternoon. It is not my first time here at Stevens. What a wonderful institution. Thank you for hosting the FCC again. It's always a pleasure for me to be back in this region. This is the region where I'm from. I did grow up across the river, but it was in the region, and I went to high school and college in this area, and I spent time back in those days working on an ambulance as an emergency medical technician in Manhattan. Now, one of the things you learn very quickly when you're anywhere near emergency services is how vital communications are. And this was the 1980s, and it was before iPhones, it was before BlackBerries, it was before mobile service was prevalent, it was before the internet, it was before social media. And we're here today in part because we see the enormous opportunities that these technologies have to improve emergency services. We see how essential all of these communication services and devices are to our everyday lives, staying in touch with family, working at or running our businesses, and of course, emergency services. A central reason we're holding these hearings is because Sandy revealed just how essential it is to have communication service available when we need it the most, during times of emergency and disaster. And as we heard from the mayor, as we've heard from so many of you, as we heard on the panel this morning, there were real issues that we all have a responsibility to roll up our sleeves as we're doing today, identify what went wrong, how to fix it, and also identify what went right and what we can learn from. I'm going to ask each of my colleagues to say a few words before we jump into the session. David Turetsky will moderate the session. David is the chief of our Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau. He oversees one of the most important bureaus at the FCC focusing on public safety communications. And I do want to acknowledge the extraordinary work of David and his team around the crisis of Sandy and other crises like the derecho. We run at the FCC a 24/7 ops center that kicks into effect. Actually, it's in 24/7 all the time. But as storms like Sandy emerge, we launch various processes to gather information, to coordinate with FEMA and state and local authorities about the state of our communications networks. We do a tremendous amount of problem solving during emergencies and as part of recovery. And so under David's leadership, working with broadcasters, mobile operators, and others, we helped make sure that fuel got to where it's needed. This is an issue that will come up this afternoon. It came up this morning. How can we improve that in the future? We provide temporary authorizations for TV and radio broadcasters and others to continue service, to switch antennas, whatever needs to be done. We work with state and local authorities to see if we can all work together to remove barriers to ensure that recovery personnel at telephone and cable companies, for example, have access to sites so that they can do recovery. And this is part of the work that at the Commission we're all very much committed to harness the opportunities of technology for public safety communications. And in the last couple of years, thanks to my colleagues and David and his team, we've done some very strong work to enable text to 911, moving as quickly as we can in that direction. We've launched wireless emergency alerts, which were used during Sandy by local authorities to send text alerts to people, warning them, directing them, giving them information. There's a tremendous amount of good work that's been done, but there's no question that there's more that needs to be done. That's what we're here to discuss today. I want to thank each of the panelists for giving us their time and their thoughts. I hope we warned you that it's not just this hour on the panel that we'll need you, but we'll need you on an ongoing basis as we follow up with you on the issues that come up today. So thank you again to Stevens, to Hoboken, to the people of Hoboken. We're looking forward to a productive afternoon. Let me introduce Commissioner Clyburn, who will hand it off to Commissioner Rosenworcel, Commissioner Pai, and then David, and we'll get going with the hearing. Thank you.
To our distinguished panelists and to our audience, good afternoon. I'm from the South, so good afternoon. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Zimmer, Provost Kovriatis, for those opening remarks. And on behalf of the Federal Communications Commission, I wish to also express my gratitude to the Stevens Institute for making it possible for us to hold this forum on the impact of Superstorm Sandy on our communications networks and the consumers who rely on them. At the FCC, we are afforded the incredible privilege of having a front row seat to some amazing developments in information technology. And I can say without any doubt that we have a lot to feel optimistic about when it comes to the communications industry, when it comes to what it can accomplish. But when we are hit with major weather events such as Superstorm Sandy, we are humbled and reminded that despite all of these great advances, we still, as a nation, remain quite vulnerable. Our thoughts and prayers remain with all of those who suffered the loss of loved ones and the loss of property during Superstorm Sandy. I commend the efforts of first responders, as well as ordinary citizens, who demonstrated unprecedented charity towards their neighbors and communities. I was in Moncks Corner, South Carolina in September of 1999. During Hurricane Hugo, I was balled up in a dark corner near other family members who escaped from Charleston. We thought it was an escape. Listening, however, to the first trees I ever loved being broken like toothpicks. I sat in fear as my grandmother's tin roofs from the barn, smokehouse, we have smokehouses down there, and parts of her house were being pulled away by what at the time seemed to me like a heartless hand of a giant. So while the extent of Sandy's power and destruction were an unprecedented event for this region, most of us have firsthand felt the tragedy brought by natural disasters. We may not be able to prevent them from occurring, but what we can and must do is improve our ability to respond. Throughout the Sandy weather event, we heard several reports about how federal, state, and local governments, as well as industry, were engaged in extensive coordination to restore important services and infrastructure to communities. I understand that the New Jersey Broadcasters Association was instrumental in working with FEMA and the FCC to help broadcast stations stay on the air. These stations were vital to providing information to communities. As communications regulators, we must do all within our power to prepare our wired and wireless communications networks, 911 systems, and other infrastructure for future weather or other unexpected events which are sure to follow. We must and will do more to provide relief to those who for more than 2 months after Sandy are still homeless or living without power. We must and will do more to prepare our wired and wireless communications networks, 911 systems, and other infrastructure for future weather events. So I applaud Chairman Janikowski for his all-hands-on approach and for recognizing and declaring early on that the Commission would come to New York and, of course, Hoboken, New Jersey, and other parts of the nation to learn about the various challenges we face with the reliability of communications networks and preparing for natural disasters. I look forward to the panelists' testimonies and recommendations on these and other related policy areas. Thank you so very much. And at this time, I will introduce to you and present to others Commissioner Jessica Rosenworcel.
Good afternoon, New Jersey. It is terrific to be here in Hoboken and in this beautiful setting at the Stevens Institute of Technology. But we are here to talk about something a little less beautiful, and that was the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy. Now, I've only been a commissioner at the FCC for some months, but during that time we have had more than our fair share of natural disasters, Hurricane Sandy included. These events not only caused immeasurable hardship on those directly affected, they also wreaked havoc with our communication systems. And while we may not know with precision what the next storm or disaster brings, we do know we must learn from what came before. So it's my hope that today we can take away lessons and bring home facts that will help make our nation's networks more resilient and the American people more safe. So I have made it a practice when I travel around the country to visit public safety communications facilities. And without question, the most powerful visits I have had are those made in the aftermath of storms. So following this fall's Hurricane Sandy, I toured a telecommunications central office in Lower Manhattan to see the impact of the storm. Weeks after the floodwaters had receded from the streets, the subterranean rooms where our networks come together were still damp. Technicians rushed this way and that, trying to make sense of an impenetrable snarl of lines and the harm done to so many submerged switches and servers. I will never forget the post-apocalyptic look of the facility. It is only one image of a storm with an infinite number of images of horror. But I will also take away from that visit an image of extraordinary hope. The sheer energy and dedication of those working to repair the damage was nothing short of amazing. Following Hurricane Sandy, I also visited several towns down along the coast of New Jersey. The storm surge propelled sand dunes blocks beyond beachfront neighborhoods, with a cruel disregard for cars and houses in the way. A police chief in one town described how other towns had their communications knocked out for days. The mayor and a public safety official in another described the disaster in chilling detail, but also noted that without extensive outreach early on, including from broadcasters and social media, it would have been much worse. So in the end, from your trials and hardships, we have an opportunity to learn. We have an opportunity to understand how well our 911 centers responded. We have an opportunity to understand if communication systems used by our police, firefighters, and other first responders performed, or if they fell short. We have an opportunity to understand what public communication is required in advance of a storm that will help residents prepare and get the information they need to stay safe. And we also have an opportunity to understand the relationship between commercial power and communications, the relationship between fuel and generators, and what it means to stay running when the unthinkable occurs. You know, our data suggest that the wireless towers that were affected by Hurricane Sandy, too many of them went out of service. In fact, 1 in 4 was not operable in the aftermath of the storm. Today, 1 in 3 households relies exclusively on wireless phones. Wireless phones in those towers are dependent on commercial power. So what happens when the power goes out? How do we ensure that backup power is where it needs to be and that providers have access to fuel for generators? And while we're at it, how do we make sure that consumers are prepared too, with backup batteries or solar-powered chargers? In the end, we have an opportunity to learn from your stories and then wrestle some good out of Hurricane Sandy. We need to take the lessons you learned and then apply them more broadly before the next storm hits or disaster devastates. So to our panelists, you are essential to this process. You are going to help us build our record. You're going to help us understand how public safety, infrastructure providers, and the government can come together and make our communication systems strong. Because we need an honest accounting of the resiliency of our nation's digital age infrastructure. And with your help, we will make our networks more secure and all of us more safe. Thank you to everyone who's joining us today. I look forward to hearing from you. Let me introduce now my friend and colleague, Commissioner Pai.
Thank you, Commissioner Rosenworcel, and thank you as well, Mayor Zimmer and Provost Korfiatis, for the hospitality, opening up Hoboken and Stevens in particular to us for the examination of these important issues is an honor, and we are grateful to you for according us that privilege. For me, today's events are about learning and listening. Through this field hearing, as well as others that we will hold in the days to come, I hope that we will gain a richer understanding of the steps that we can take to improve the performance of our communications networks during natural disasters. Chairman Janikowski, I thank you once again, as I did this morning, for holding this important hearing. To be sure, there is much for us to learn. Our first job, of course, is to figure out what happened during and after Superstorm Sandy. And then, once we've determined what happened, we have to take the lessons that we've learned and look to the future. Of course, there are some things that we already know. For one, we know that improving the resilience of communications networks must be one of our major goals moving forward. Americans, particularly those in New York City, are intimately familiar with the slogan, "Too big to fail." Well, simply put, our communications networks are too important to fail. That is especially true during natural disasters, because the ability to communicate may well be the difference between life and death. So we have to examine what can be done to improve these networks in order to minimize disruptions when disasters strike, which inevitably they will. We also know that reliable power is essential to communications during public safety emergencies. Unfortunately, during Sandy, persistent and widespread power outages affected several communications networks. At one point, as my colleague Commissioner Rosenworcel pointed out, about 1/4 of cell sites across 10 states were out of commission, and a substantial portion of those outages resulted from the loss of power. Backup power can prevent networks from failing, but flooding will ruin even the sturdiest diesel generator. Large stockpiles of fuel in urban areas may not be practical. And even the best battery, our largest fuel tank, will eventually give out. So we also need to ask what steps we can take to avoid power outages in the first place and to bring our communications networks back on the grid sooner rather than later. To do that, we may need to bridge the communication gap between utilities on one hand and network operators on the other. In Sandy's aftermath, for example, I and others have heard of many complaints that local power companies did not coordinate with network operators. If this is true, it simply has to change. Another thing we know is that new Internet protocol-based technologies can make communications more reliable for the public during public safety emergencies. Traditional 911 services, while immensely valuable, rely on older copper networks and selective routers to connect the public with emergency personnel and to collect the information they need. Just last week, I visited a public safety answering point in Virginia and heard firsthand how a single point of failure took down all of their operations last summer. That's unacceptable. But when the IP transition comes to emergency services, when we start deploying next generation 911, all of this will change. In Pike County, Pennsylvania, a short trip from New York City, 911 dispatched moved into a state-of-the-art facility last year. A mere 18 days later, Sandy struck. But Pike County 911 reported that the new system held up extraordinarily well. No outages occurred in the 911 center whatsoever, even though Pike County itself was without power for a week. One major reason is that Pike County, like other next-generation facilities, employs fail-safes to ensure that emergency services keep running. Fiber links the two Pike County facilities, allowing one center to take over for another in the event of an outage or to handle overflow in mass call events. Mark Fletcher, an expert on next-generation 911 services, recently pointed out that if you call 911 during a mass call event, you usually get a busy signal. But if you hang up the phone and call your airline to check on your flight, you're going to get through. That's because the airline industry, among others, already is taking advantage of technology that routes calls to the nearest call center with availability rather than to the nearest call center as such. We need these kinds of next-generation systems across the country to ensure quick and effective emergency response. And that's why upgrading our emergency systems to next-generation 911 has to be a top priority. Yet another thing we know is that our citizens may not need to contact emergency personnel if they receive timely, thorough information over the airwaves. I'm especially looking forward to hearing from broadcasters and social media experts and others today about their efforts to keep the public safe and informed during the storm. For example, the New Jersey Governor, Chris Christie, took to the airwaves on New Jersey's 101.5 show, Ask the Governor, to provide information and field questions from listeners just as Sandy was making landfall. I'm eager to hear about the efforts of broadcasters and others during and after the storm. Last but certainly not least, we know that the emergency personnel and service staff who worked to the ground during Sandy deserve our continuing thanks. We rely so heavily on all of you every day for the thousands of thankless tasks you do without any question. And when things got tough during Sandy, you made the sacrifice. My mind is drawn to the story of Bob Franco, a Wayne Township police officer who was working Hurricane Sandy and was crushed in his cruiser while he was driving around because a tree fell and pinned him inside. As he felt a numbness envelop him, he said to himself, "I thought that was it. This was the end of my time on Earth." Fortunately for him, one of his colleagues, Captain Mark McGrath, came by and cut the door off his car and managed to extract him. His wife, Linda, said recently, "We don't know what the future holds, but we praise God that he's alive. It could have been so much worse." I'm happy to report that Bob Franco is recovering. He's in physical therapy. But his wife's statement that things could have been so much worse is so true across this region. It could have been a lot more worse, but for the efforts of people like Officer Franco. And so my humble thanks go out to him and to all of our emergency personnel for their dedicated service to our communities. In closing, I look forward to listening and to learning to our panelists today. The witnesses we will hear will help ensure that the Federal Communications Commission both understands the problems caused by Superstorm Sandy and has the information that it needs to move forward. Thank you once again. And I would note that Commissioner Robert McDowell, our fifth colleague, is unavailable to be here because he's testifying on Capitol Hill, but I can assure you that he shares the sentiments of the four of us, that we want to understand what happened in the storm and take every measure that we can take to make sure that communications outages don't happen again. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. As Chairman Janikowski mentioned, I'm David Turetsky. I'm the Chief of the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau at the FCC, and I'll be moderating the panel this afternoon. I want to first thank my staff in the Bureau for all of the hard work they did to get this event together, as well as the staff throughout the FCC and the other bureaus and offices who contributed as well and who have contributed in responding to Sandy. The theme of this panel is communicating during times of emergency, and it focuses on consumers. I'm going to introduce the panelists in a moment, and then I will explain the procedure by which we'll go forward in a little while. I also want to just say how glad I am to be back in New Jersey. I grew up in this state. I graduated high school in this state. I lived here for a very long time, and my family, much of it, still lives here today. And the people of New York and New Jersey who are visiting today, much like in a Springsteen song, really showed a lot of grit and are still showing a lot of grit. I want to also thank some of the panelists who are based in New York for coming to New Jersey, just as some panelists this morning in New York came there from New Jersey. So together, this area is joining in response and in our panels. The panelists for today are John Hogan, who is the Chairman and CEO of Clear Channel's Media and Entertainment Division. Welcome. Dave Davis, who's the President and GM of WABC TV, which is the most watched local news station in the tri-state area. Nigel Snode, who is part of Google's crisis response team. Emily Rahimi, who manages social media for the New York Fire Department. And Chuck Bell, who is the Programs Director for Consumers Union based in Yonkers, New York. Welcome to all of you. The procedure will be the same as it was this morning, and for those of you who are joining us afresh now, what that will consist of is a question that I will ask to each panelist. They will have 5 minutes, up to 5 minutes to respond. There's a clock right in front, which hopefully will count down. After we've gone through a question for each panelist and a response, I'll turn it over to the commissioners, and they will each ask 5 minutes of questions. And if there's any time left, which there probably won't be, we'll ask some more questions. With that, let me proceed. And the first question is to John Hogan. You're primarily in the radio business. Tell us about what your stations did to keep the public informed and to continue operating through Superstorm Sandy.
Thank you, David. And Chairman Janikowski and Commissioners, thank you for this opportunity to share our story. We own 3 radio stations in New Jersey and 5 in New York, and take our role as first informers very seriously. We had the benefit of knowing that Hurricane Sandy was coming. We didn't know where exactly, and so we had to prepare in a number of cities up and down the East Coast, as is the practice that we have. In New York and New Jersey, a number of things took place in advance of the storm. First was that we activated our emergency preparedness plans. All of our radio stations have a plan, and that went into action. It starts with making sure that our resources, particularly the backup plans, are all in place. We made sure we had fuel for our generators, checked the generators, also made sure that all of our employees were ready to participate in this. We also activated our disaster assistance and recovery program, which is a national support system to those local plans that we have. We have 8 DARP sites. Each of those DARP sites has a semi-trailer truck or 2 full of emergency equipment and backup equipment. We have auxiliary towers, generators. We also have fuel trucks, and we brought those to sort of the far western edge of what we thought the storm area was going to be. That said, the interesting thing about people in radio is that when a disaster is imminent, radio people run towards it. They know that they provide a vital function, that oftentimes they are the only source of information, particularly when other systems fail. And so they are prepared. We had people who literally camped out at our stations for days. We're housed in New York in the old AT&T building, interestingly enough, and we were without heat or power for a number of days. However, we were able to continue broadcasting. In anticipation of the storm, we changed our programming. We began to air more weather and more information about how to prepare for the storm as it became more clear that it was going to hit in New Jersey and New York. We continued to add to the news and weather programming that we had. As the storm hit and passed through, we were able to stay on the air the entire time. We did lose a tower in New Jersey, but because of the systems that we had in place, we were able to switch to auxiliary and never go off the air. In New York, we switched our transmission from the Empire State Building to 4 Times Square. Again, the planning and the preparedness that we had in place allowed us to do that. Throughout the storm, we went basically wall to wall with news and information and updates, letting our listeners know what the situation was. We brought on a number of public officials, gave them the opportunity to share information, and that continued throughout the storm. We had people who were on the air for 10, 12, 14 hours at a time. Our listeners became an integral part of the programming. We were providing the news in real time. We would hear from people who'd been affected by trees falling, power going out, flooding, and so on. And a big part of our role was to direct our listeners to resources. In the days following Sandy, we let them know where sources for food, shelter, fuel, and other things were. Interestingly enough, we are still doing that today. As a number of people have said, the area is still a long way from being fully recovered, and we continue to direct people to different resources and to provide relief for those listeners.
Thank you, John. Dave Davis, who I believe also chairs the TV committee of the New York Broadcasters Association, who we also worked very closely with during the storm, as well as the New Jersey Association. Dave, as president and GM of the most watched local news station in the tri-state area, tell us about what you did in connection with reaching the consumers through this seriously affected area, and tell us how the Superstorm changed that.
Thanks, David. Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, Mayor Zimmer. We spent a lot of time in Hoboken, saw what you described firsthand, so we're glad to be here, glad to be at Stevens, and a chance to talk about broadcasting, television broadcasting during Sandy. One thing about hurricanes, as opposed to some other natural disasters, you have a pretty good idea it's coming. We started on October 19th. 10 days or more before the hurricane hit. We have 4 fully trained meteorologists on staff full-time, And that's when they started to track the storm, notify our viewers of the potential to this area, and continued that. Local news and information is really the foundation for Channel 7. We regularly program 42 hours a week of live local news, and for the week leading up to the storm, the potential for the storm really dominated our coverage. So our job was twofold. Number one, to prepare the viewers for what was to come, and also to prepare ourselves, because we knew if we didn't have our infrastructure complete and storm ready, then any life-saving information we had would not be able to reach our viewers. We have, unfortunately, a lot of experience in New York City covering disasters. Certainly 9/11 was the worst. But through weather extremes, blizzards, storms, hurricanes, we have prepared ourselves. We are self-powered. We certainly appreciate the fact when the power stays on, but we prepare ourselves for the worst-case scenarios. We have 3 generators at our main studio facility on the Upper West Side. We have generators at our main transmitter at Empire State Building and at our backup transmitter on 4 Times Square. We put transmitters on 2 different buildings after 9/11. We also have ways to directly feed cable and satellite companies. We have a full recovery site in New Jersey in case we have to lose the ability to broadcast from Manhattan. So during the week before the storm, we spent a lot of time testing those systems, the backups to the backups, the transmission lines, the studio to transmitter links, to make sure we were prepared. On the Sunday before the storm, when the MTA and the governor decided to shut down the transit system, 7 million people a day use mass transit in some form in our area. So that was a significant enough event that we went on the air continuously at that point. During the 8 days before, during, and after the storm, we produced 122 hours of local information, public service information, everything from forecasts to where the storm surge was, how bad it was going to be, wind speed, all the weather information, emergency information, where to go, what to do, where to evacuate, where they needed emergency help. Sometimes it was as small as one family trying to locate another family member and our reporter going up 20 flights of stairs to see if somebody was there, or as large as covering every major news conference, Governor Cuomo, Governor Christie, Governor Malloy, Mayor Bloomberg. Every time they spoke, we made sure that we were there to get that information across to people. We have an extensive fleet of satellite microwave vehicles in order to get information to people. We also knew that a lot of people had the potential to lose power. So we arranged through our sister company, ESPN, to supply the content to their 2 radio stations, AM and FM. We also take advantage of a lot of the digital platforms. We have hundreds of thousands of users on all of our digital sites, and the use of those we knew would increase dramatically since people generally can maintain power to their phones or iPads, sometimes easier if they lose power. Those are transmission points. Those are ways to reach people, but understand that the content has to be there to make that delivery meaningful. So the content is acquired by our large news staff for our television broadcasts. So all of our reporters, our crews, the video that they gather, that's what goes onto those digital platforms and to the social media users. So we've been in that mode, and soon after the storm, we arranged with our company, our parent company, the Walt Disney Company, to conduct a day of giving and raised almost $17 million for storm relief. So as John pointed out, the mission continues. There's still people impacted here by the storm, and we will continue to cover that.
Thank you. Thank you. Now I'd like to turn to Nigel Snode, who is the product manager for Google Crisis Response. In that capacity, you provide a product that is intended to inform consumers about emergencies and response. Can you tell us about it and how consumers can access and benefit from it?
Thank you very much. Just to start with, I'd like to thank the Chairman, Commissioners, and the Mayor for the opportunity, and just on behalf of myself, the company, and a team of sort of professionals and volunteers who have the mission of providing affected populations with information during crises and emergencies. So, that's the start. So what we actually did was, it wasn't so much a single product, is that we have a whole suite of different products, some of which we used during Superstorm Sandy, some of which we didn't. It depends on the situation. And so, I could run down a list and talk about, we have Google Public Alerts, we have a crisis map that is a mashup of lots of different content layers that's relevant for people, that we adapt and adjust on the fly as we find out what's available, what people need, and so forth. We also change and adapt our search results to give you people information for what they're looking for. And I think it's really important to start with that perspective that the reason we're involved in this is because people come to us to find information. It's sort of almost a truism nowadays, but particularly during crises. And so we see often incredible peaks in queries around a crisis. People are looking for particular things, either about the whole of the situation or particular situations like in Superstorm Sandy, they're looking for gas. Right? Where is gas availability? Where are gas outages? And that's something you have to work very aggressively to try and provide good information for. And it's both a public service and just part of our mission and mandate. And so we've taken a number of steps to try and do that better, and that's why we have a standing team of professionals who help coordinate across the company to find information and to work with partners like the New York City Mayor's Office, the State of New Jersey, OEM, FEMA, and so forth. One of the products that we have, I'll talk about a couple of them, but one of them is what we sort of call Google Public Alerts. And the goal of this is to improve our search results and some of our other products with emergency information from official providers. So this was triggered in a way after the sort of Japan earthquakes 2 years ago almost to the day, sort of looking ahead a month and a half, I suppose, whereby people in Hawaii, for instance, regularly searched, once they'd heard there was an earthquake, for information about a tsunami. And that day there was a massive, 100 times peak in people searching for that. A huge proportion of people in Hawaii searched, and the results that we and everybody had that were immediately available actually weren't giving them what they needed. So we've partnered with groups like the National Weather Service, NOAA, US Geological Survey, National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, to take their official alerting information and critically in an open standards-based format, because that's what makes it possible to do this. Getting a hold of lots of different information, lots of different formats is just a nightmare to imagine. And take that information, ingest it, and then show it when it's relevant to people when they're searching. And on products like Google Now, in the latest version of Android, it'll suggest information we think you should know, including emergency alerts and so forth. So we activated that. It's been running all year, last year, but 4 days before Sandy hit, we turned it on for web search. For when you went to the normal Google search box, you could, if you typed Sandy, or more particularly if you typed hurricane or high wind, you'd actually get the official NOAA National Weather Service alert with a link to more information, maps, news, contextual information, and preparedness information about what to do to keep yourself safe. They, of course, expired. They're early warnings. So once the storm hits, they're gone. The official alerting providers are past. And what we typically do, and we do this all over the world in large crises, is that we built a map and other sort of a box of links to official state information and so forth in search results. And so that if you came to us looking for information, we'd give you as quickly as possible a link to the official or the unofficial but really relevant information about everything from gas outages to so forth. And our map, where we had sort of more than, I think, about 40 layers on it from different providers, such as we had our alerts, but we also had a transit layer we took from working with the MTA. We had gas data that we took from HES, but also some data that we got through sources in the state of New Jersey and otherwise, and even some volunteer information from various organizations. And the goal with that is to provide a place where you can come as a citizen, if you're looking for information, just to try and find whatever you can. And critically, these are tools that are designed to be embedded and reused by others, because the goal with this really is to get it out as broadly as possible. And I think the right way to think about this from our perspective is that we have this audience who come to us increasingly, if you look at the utilization of news versus the internet and broadcast media, this transition that we're in the middle of, and mobile. And what we want to do is basically provide a channel and be an aggregator for this information from official sources and make it accessible and useful.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. Emily Rahimi. Emily is the manager of social media for the New York Fire Department. I think you played a more important role than you expected in communicating through social media, specifically Twitter, when and after Superstorm Sandy hit. Can you tell us about what you did, how it assisted the public, and any lessons for the future that you take away from that experience?
Sure. Thank you, Commissioners and Mayor, for having me here today. The day that Sandy hit, I had been planning to do what I normally do in an emergency, which is kind of follow the lead of the New York City Mayor's Office and Office of Emergency Management. They generally try to pull together the most up-to-date, current information and make sure that all city agencies share that information with the public to make sure that we have a very unified message and that all of us are giving out very accurate information, because we would hate to be giving out false information. And for the morning of the storm, that's what I was doing. I was putting out information about safety tips, how people could prepare for the storm, what they could do if they lost electricity, just ways that they can get ready and to make sure that they were taking it seriously. And that pretty much went on until about the height of the storm, when I started to notice a lot of tweets, especially coming in, that were almost like 911 calls for help. Most of the people were tweeting that they were having severe flooding in their homes, that they were trapped, but they didn't know what to do. I made sure to let them know that if they had the opportunity to call 911, that they should do that I didn't want anybody to rely on Twitter, especially to me, as an alternative to 911, because I didn't have any means of entering that information into the 911 system. But a lot of these people were tweeting back saying that they didn't have phone service and that was really their only means of reaching out to anyone for help. So I collected as much information as I could from them, addresses, names, phone numbers, and then called our dispatchers, which are located in each of our boroughs, to make sure that they had that information in their system. And then got back to these individuals who had tweeted me saying that I had contacted dispatch, that they knew about this situation, but to continue trying to call 911 because I didn't want anybody to think that that was the best means of getting through to them. I wanted to make sure that they could provide dispatchers with more information by calling them if they could. I heard back from a few different people saying that they had gotten help, which was a big relief for me. And then I heard about a couple in the days afterwards that had gotten help that way, which was great. Throughout the storm, I also was seeing a lot of information coming through that was false. And so I worked very closely with our press office to validate and invalidate certain things that people were tweeting about to make sure that there wasn't any unnecessary panic going on. There were people talking about car dealerships where all the cars were on fire, or different explosions that were happening throughout the city, and I didn't want anybody to unnecessarily worry that their life might be in jeopardy. And then as things started to slow down a little bit, I was getting a lot of tweets about people who had lost electricity and didn't know what to do, or if there was still flooding outside, should they leave their house, were they in danger? And I was trying to get information to them as quickly as possible about what they should do in their particular situation. And then in the days after the storm, the mayor's office was putting out a lot of information on their website about ways that people could get relief supplies, where they could contact FEMA, different things that would be helpful to them. I assumed that the people who were tweeting at the height of the storm and said they didn't have phone service still didn't. So I made sure to tweet out as much as possible and put it on Facebook to ensure that people were being safe and that they were getting the help that they needed.
Thank you, Emily. A very compelling story. I'd like to turn now to Chuck Bell, the Program Director for Consumers Union, which is based in Yonkers, New York. Chuck, the tools consumers use to communicate and to get information were impacted significantly by Superstorm Sandy. Can you share your thoughts on these impacts and any ways to possibly enhance consumers' ability to communicate in the future when facing such events?
So I work for Consumers Union. That's the nonprofit organization that publishes Consumer Reports magazine. And we think that Hurricane Sandy highlights a couple new risks when people drop their traditional landline telephones in favor of wireless and broadband internet. I think there's a couple key points which are quite familiar to the FCC, but perhaps less familiar to the public. One of which is that about a third of phone subscribers now are exclusively wireless. The mobile phone is their go-to phone. They don't necessarily have a landline system as a backup. And then among landline phones that we have, about a third of those are now broadband internet phones. And those are more vulnerable to power outages in a way that the old hardwired phones that had a copper line network were not. So in the old days, you were a bit more likely to be able to have service during a storm, and disruptions are increasingly possible for people with broadband internet phones. So in this case, at the peak of the storm, we had the storm knocking out maybe about 25% of the mobile network capacity, and also about 25% of cable subscribers in the mid-Atlantic states losing service. So this is really, millions of consumers with a serious service disruption. In that situation, I think, we have phones. We think of phones as consumers, as public safety devices. And an emergency is really when you need your phone the most, as was mentioned by the commissioner. You have to be able to call your daycare provider to say, I'm going to be a couple hours late to pick up my kids. You may have to call your shift supervisor at the hospital to say you're going to be late for your job, and so forth. So how did consumers get by in that situation? A lot of people were able to borrow phones from other networks that might have been working, because not all the networks were uniformly affected. Some people had backup landline coverage, but many did not. If people could access Wi-Fi, they might be able to make internet calls through Skype. They might be able to go to coffee shops or charge up their phone in the car. We do have more digital platforms today in some redundant capacity, so consumers had some options for workarounds. But I think it's important to recognize also many simply did not and were really stuck and had faced a very difficult situation. On the landline side, I think we're concerned that many consumers who lost cable service did lose their phone, and some consumers in areas of New York and New Jersey were without power for up to 2 weeks or longer. And so in that situation, if they didn't have a mobile phone, they really didn't have phone service, and that significantly impairs their ability to communicate. So in terms of what we think need to be done, we think we need minimum standards for network resilience for cell towers and broadband networks during emergencies. We need to ensure that landline service remains available also in rural and low-income areas. So we hope the FCC will continue to look in requiring carriers to provide additional capacity in terms of backup power, temporary towers or mobile trucks, and also strengthening or hardening networks for landline infrastructure so the towers can contribute with the terrestrial networks. We again think this storm begs the question of what the minimum standard should be. Industry experts said some measures that carriers have adopted have indeed been effective, but are they effective enough if 20 to 25% of the network can go out? This is not the last emergency we're going to have, and we think going forward, more public reporting of key metrics regarding service levels could be helpful. Consumers tend to be mad at their carrier if their mobile signal went out, but we don't know generally how our carriers are doing in terms of these things. We want to be prepared for the next emergency that comes. And so more transparency and holding the telecom providers accountable for the results we think could be quite helpful. We think more could be done to improve online reporting of service outages by telecom providers. Service providers might also do more to cooperate in emergencies, for example, by sharing signals across proprietary networks or opening up Wi-Fi hotspots for free temporary public use. The FCC should also study options for improving the resilience and continuity of service for VoIP services. And this includes issues such as consumers having an 8-hour backup battery attached to their broadband internet phone. We don't think consumers are generally aware that they may have a battery in their house, that perhaps they should purchase extra batteries, how that system works, if it's actually indeed charged up before the storm. So there's a lot of issues there that need to be looked at. Some telecom providers provided automatic service credits. In other cases, consumers had to affirmatively contact their cable or phone company to ask for a refund, so that has been a significant issue for consumers. And one more issue would be for people who are deaf and hard of hearing, there were a number of improvements in terms of state and local governments doing more to put information in American Sign Language and closed captioning systems, but also a number of important safety videos appeared on the internet without closed captioning or sign language, and that was an issue for those communities.
Thank you very much. That's a lot of food for thought. Now I'd like to turn to the commissioners and invite questions. We'll start with Commissioner Clyburn.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. You just teed up a question that I had interest in. I thought about it when I was watching some of the news coverage in D.C. About the aftermath of the storm, or really leading up to the storm, in that I remember vividly this individual who English was not a first language for him. He had no idea that the subways would be shut down at 7, and he was literally stuck. So how do we, in terms of what we could do better, and you enumerated a number of things, how can we ensure that that type of exchange is lessened, and what more can we do, meaning as a Federal Communications Commission, to assist those 54 million persons with disabilities? What more what can we do right now to ensure a better outcome going forward?
Well, I think a key thing is really soliciting public input and participation of organizations that may represent vulnerable populations or consumers that speak foreign languages. I feel that the FCC, to your credit, really owns this problem, as you're aware of the challenge posed by communications service interruption in a way that many other federal or state agencies may not be. Obviously, to deal with the complex needs of consumers with disabilities or low and moderate income populations, people with impaired mobility, this is something that requires the cooperation of lots of stakeholders and government agencies, and so I think it's very challenging, but I think the first thing is to get it out there and start to talk about it, because I know consumers with disabilities have many suggestions for things that ought to be done, and if you create more tables for them to participate, they will come forward and they'll give you those suggestions. So I think more dialogue and debate about solutions is important. And it's also important we fund the solutions, because sometimes we don't have the resources behind them.
Mr. Rahimi, you're no longer the secret, you were the secret weapon before, but we're more and more knowing more and learning more about your incredible efforts. Along the same line, I'm wondering if you heard from or what you're thinking about, again, those persons with disabilities, those individuals who are not necessarily, proficient in English or Spanish. What could or should we be doing, or what type of exchange, if any, did you have with those individuals?
I got a couple tweets from people who, I received a couple tweets from people who spoke different languages. We have quite a few people in the department who speak various languages who I rely on in those situations to make sure that I'm saying everything adequate and appropriate to them. We also have all of our fire safety materials translated into different languages. We're looking to do more with videos for YouTube and things like that. So I think, I hope that maybe someday we'll be able to translate our whole website. And I think anything that we can do to, and anything any agency can do to translate and to try to reach as many people as possible is always great.
And Mr. Hogan and Mr. Davis, how is all of this influencing the way you deliver in terms of tweeting, as well as these particular populations that may be more vulnerable?
Thank you, Commissioner. Well, as you know, we closed caption all of our broadcasts in English. We also, our choice, take the second closed caption channel and closed caption in Spanish, because we know we serve a significant Hispanic community. We also closed caption our digital streams, and as you know, March 30th, we have additional responsibilities in that regard, which we obviously will be in compliance and make sure that a lot of our digital streams are also closed captions. But all of our broadcasts for that entire period were closed caption in English and in Spanish. And as New York State broadcasters, we also have several Spanish language television stations and numerous Spanish language radio stations that also serve the community.
I don't know if you had anything to add. And what about the, if you wanted to, Mr. Hogan, what about the social networking side of it? What proportion, how much is that changing or influencing or making things either more challenging or more robust?
It's actually enhancing our ability to connect with our listeners. We use social media in addition to the broadcast. We tweeted to lots of our listeners. We used our online capabilities, our websites, to provide information and directions. And so, increasingly for us, it's another distribution platform, as I said, for us to connect with those listeners.
The power of 140 characters, right? 140 characters, I tell you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Commissioner Rosenworcel.
First of all, thank you all for being here today. I want to build a little bit on the question that my colleague just asked, but I want to do it by telling you this story. When I visited the New Jersey shore sometime after Hurricane Sandy hit, and I talked to some public safety officials in one town, they told me this story, how because they knew the storm was coming, they made a lot of efforts in the days before to take non-essential equipment and move it off the barrier island to higher ground. They also removed a lot of police cars that they didn't think would be necessary during the storm. And then after the storm hit, as they tried to deal with the water that was flowing through all of their streets, they weren't able to locate a particular police car. Sometime later on social media, someone found a picture, and it was from above, because it was so flooded, the only way that they could identify it was from this picture above that had the number on the top of the car. And I actually thought that was a really neat story, but it drove home to me something, which is this. We tend to use social media in an ad hoc way now when we have emergencies. And I'm wondering if there are ways to incorporate it more formally or more systematically when events like this occur. Any one of you.
So, I think you could look, there's actually a fair few efforts to have a look at how you can mine social media streams of different kinds for information and how you can categorize and sort of get a consistent story out of it. And sort of it goes under various rubrics such as sentiment mapping and various other names like this. And in some ways it's just a variant of what sort of commercial companies do when they're looking at brand protection and so forth. So I know for certain the American Red Cross uses some commercial platforms for monitoring social media streams and categorizing those and turning those into more structured data that they can then assign cases to and responses to. So part of that's looking about how they're performing, but part of that's actually what are people's needs and so forth. Now, my team doesn't do that specifically at all, but I think there's an interesting flip side, which is that one of the things we did during Sandy that was kind of new for us and is a thread I want to keep diving into is that the updating and veracity of information that's on our maps, on our public information, is out of date instantly. The moment it's published, the gas station is out of fuel, basically, or something like this. Like, we repeatedly got official source of information, struggled to get it online quickly, and little ask here, please provide in open standard formats with good licenses, otherwise we can't do that at all. And then by the time we published it, it was out of date. And we had sort of consumers and our users reporting to us via whatever channel they could that this is out of date. And I think sort of New Jersey Gas is a good example that the Twitter stream there was one of the better sources of information from people providing information. So the structure's there. It's not the traditional sense of structure, a table, but it is structured in terms of interest streams already. But then when we mapped it, we provided a facility for people to be able to say and comment on the map, hey, this is out of date. So it depends on how you view social media, but I see that as a part of the social infrastructure that people make use of and express comments. And I'm looking to see how we can do better with that and basically make that close the feedback cycle, if you like, there.
I think one point, I mean, we use social media extensively and developing it all the time, and it can be a great tool. But I think we have to remember that certainly in terms of emergency, Emily made reference to all the rumors out there. Just because something's on the internet doesn't mean it's true. And we have developed over the years professional journalists, people who live and work here, people who have covered these kind of stories, people who have relationships with public officials, and can deliver the type of information in a way that is truthful, is accurate, That's what people need most. So the investment that broadcasters have made over the years into journalism, I think, is important to remember. And during the height of the storm, we lost electricity, we lost key internet centers in downtown Manhattan. We know we lost a lot of cell phone power. Broadcasting never went out. We never went off the air. We're never off the air on a regular basis. We're on the air 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. During the storm, all the television stations licensed in New York City stayed on the air, as did the radio stations. So, I think we have to weigh. There is advantage to all these forms of communication, but we also have to remember that citizen-generated media, we used a lot. We've got a tremendous amount of information and pictures from the public, but we collate it. We look at it. We do our best to verify it through journalistic means before we put it back out to the public, and I think that's important to remember.
I think that's right. I mean, that's the heart of what good broadcasting is. It's a curated experience. We have relationships, both in radio and television, that we've developed over years and years and years. They look to us for really a lifeline. We're the conduit of information and the reliable information that they can turn to in those times.
Thank you. Let's turn to Commissioner Pai.
Thank you, David, and thanks to each of you for your testimony. What strikes me as you've described your perspectives is that the means that you employ are as different as the similarity of the ends. What I mean by that is whether it's radio broadcasting, television broadcasting, internet-based analytics, social media, landline, telephone service, all of you are trying to reach consumers where they are to provide them the information that they need. And so I think it highlights, for me at least, the need to really take a holistic view of the communications landscape and not say in isolation that, it's only landline service that we need to focus on, or it's only broadcasting. It's an all of the above approach, I think, when it comes to public safety. So thank you for providing those perspectives. I guess my first questions would be for the broadcasters on the panel. One of the things I noted was that Arbitron has reported that between 7 p.m. and midnight on October 29th, the night Sandy made landfall, 1 million people in the New York City region in any 15-minute period of time were listening to the radio. And that listenership was up 70% for the region compared to the previous week. And for coastal areas, it's even higher. For Monmouth County, for example, is 367% higher than it was the week before. So it just heightens the importance of radio, I think, in moments like this. And so, Mr. Hogan, I was wondering in particular about what you were hearing from your listeners. What kind of information were they telling you that they needed, and how did you meet that need?
Yeah, it was really incredible because we were hearing from people who were in the heart of the storm. And we were hearing from people whose homes were flooding, or people who had lost electrical power, people who were on the road, and they were giving us information about trees down or streets that were impassable. And it was really that real-time exchange of information. When we broke format, one of the things that we did is we began to put more and more and more of the person in the street on the air. We did a lot of live broadcasts of people who were calling in. And, it was a way for us to get the information out very quickly, to get it out in a very credible, immediate, and very personal way.
And I guess for you and for Mr. Davis, is there anything from an FCC regulatory perspective that we should take into account to make it easier for you to reach your listeners? Obviously, you've got great staff and great facilities, but if there are any rules standing in the way, we would like to know what they are.
We want to make sure that as you make decisions going forward on spectrum and other issues that impact our ability to reach consumers, that we are able to maintain that reach. We serve a market of 20 million people. We're not just as David pointed out, the most watched station in the market. We're the most watched station in the country because of the size of the market. And to maintain the ability to continue to reach those people, 7.5 million households. It's a small percentage that receive us only over the air, but because of the size of the market, that's about 640,000 people that receive us only through over-the-air basis. And that has the potential to grow. And those are sometimes the most vulnerable of our population. the elderly, the poor, people who can't afford a cable or satellite bill, they can still we're free. They can still get us over the air. So I think that's important, and we would ask, the FCC in their wisdom to make sure that we still have that capacity to reach people. Certainly, we're helpful. David mentioned the fuel situation, and very helpful to make sure that we had arrangements. A lot of that we did, ourselves. Stations would arrange themselves. We have contracts ourselves for diesel and those things in emergency situations. But in certain times, to get access to fuel is also important.
And I think geographic access as well. It's important for us to be able to get to where we need to get to, whether it's having our people have access to get to the radio stations, our fuel trucks have access to the generators. It was not an issue for us here with Superstorm Sandy, but it has been an issue for us in other disasters. With Katrina, it was a real problem for us to be able to supply our generators. We had found the fuel, we had trucked in the fuel, we couldn't get past, and so having maybe a little more flexibility around the access and allowing us to do what we need to do to keep the flow of information going.
Thanks, and I have one quick question left, and that's for Mr. Bell. One of the issues we heard about this morning was the difference between copper and fiber when it came to wireline infrastructure. Verizon, for example, told us that in Lower Manhattan they replaced, by and large, 150 tons of copper that were previously in the ground with fiber. And I was wondering if you have a perspective on the resiliency of those two methods of landline infrastructure.
Well, I just think in terms of performance at the end of the wire for the consumer, the fact that a phone would work on a copper line network, a hardwired phone could work on a copper line network in a severe storm, is a capacity that is gradually going away, right? So people, I think, I'm not sure what the technical challenges are involved in shoring up optical cable so that it could be as robust, or that there are robust backup systems to ensure the consumer has access to communications. But I guess I feel that we are paying a lot for the telecommunications services we get as consumers, and network resilience is one of the things we're paying for. And so while we've migrated to a digital environment where we have much greater capacity and much more sophisticated applications of various kinds, that core need of the phone as a public safety device in an emergency needs to be protected. And so somehow we've got to satisfy that need, either through technological means or regulatory means. And so I don't want to be prescriptive about what technology should be used, but I think the system we have is falling short of what consumers have a right to expect.
Thank you. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Let's turn to Chairman Janikowski.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you. And it's terrific to have this panel of multiple platforms discussing experiences, giving us ideas. Emily Rahimi, I wanted to start with you. What an interesting set of experiences you had. We heard you say that you were very concerned as you were getting the incoming tweets about making sure that people understood that you weren't integrated into the 911 system. And I understand that completely. As a result of the success that you had, do you sense in New York a growing desire to accelerate next generation 911, the integration of the different platforms into the 911 system? And what should we be thinking about, lessons from your experience?
Sure. I definitely think that this was just kind of the tip of the iceberg. That, in future emergencies, people will rely on social media and other forms of, other things they can do with their smartphone, whether it's an app or a different platform that hasn't yet been invented for social media to communicate not only with each other, but for help. And so I think that that's definitely something that this experience has taught me, is that need has accelerated tremendously. And that if we can find a way to either do the text to 911 to get help, or if we can find a way to integrate certain forms of social media into the 911 system, or develop some sort of app where people can fill out information and get it sent into the system, anything like that would be tremendously helpful.
We'll need your ongoing help on that. It's obviously an important topic. I want to ask each of the panelists for some concrete ideas. I think one of the themes that emerged from several of your comments was the importance of having greater consumer awareness. People's behaviors are changing, the opportunities are changing, and there's a lot that it would help people to know. I think, Mr. Davis, I think you mentioned the nature of a hurricane is that you know it's coming. Reminding people to charge their devices in advance so that if power goes out, they have a charged device. Or, you mentioned that part of your preparation was making sure your signal was available on ESPN, and part of that was because if the power goes out in your home, you can still get radio in your car. Or the backup that people in their homes should know that they need more in this new world than in the old world. And so my question for each of you is, what concrete ideas do you have on what you can do on your platforms or we can do at the FCC to increase consumer awareness of things that people can do to prepare and protect themselves in the event of emergencies like Sandy? And Chuck, why don't we go this way?
I would start by saying I feel we need a strong component of media localism so that you have diversity of ownership of the media and you have organizations that do local reporting and local community affairs work. And we don't always get that with the highly concentrated ownership of the media that we have. A second thing would be, I do see social media being able to be used as a force multiplier to translate in complex information to diverse audiences. And so, for example, using the example of the Spanish-speaking consumers, we can tell the consumers of New York and New Jersey what Governor Christie and Governor Cuomo had to say in Spanish through social media, or we could get that information to the deaf and the hard of hearing. So I think we should do that. I think we do need to keep to work to find a way to hold the telecom providers accountable. And so as a consumer, I would like more detailed information about how my carriers are doing in strengthening their infrastructure and strengthening resilience, and not just for this storm, but for the possible emergencies to come. So if there's some way that the FCC can hold their feet to the fire and increase the transparency of that information, we'd be very interested in that.
Great. Concrete ideas on consumer awareness? Emily?
I think that anything that we can do to communicate with them better, whether it's kind of integrating all of our platforms, whether it's using television to talk about fire safety tips that are on our website, or using radio, just to be able to integrate with one another, I think would be great.
We have an enormous number of consumers coming to us, as I said, looking for information. So one of my biggest challenges is making sure that we have the content in a standard and reusable way, because the traditional sort of channels for content delivery and production through traditional media is still extremely valuable, particularly in times of crisis. But the innovation that we're seeing happening, whether it's social media or the next thing, demands that we have an open ecosystem of content in standard ways that we can use, I can innovate around, others can generate and comment on and be flexible with. And so particularly sort of the availability of open and standard-based content from official publishers and from other sources such as the power companies and so forth, I'm just being hypothetical here, is actually really important. Because who knows who's going to make the mashup that it actually informs everybody? Who knows who's going to provide the tweet that everybody's going to generate around as authority shifts and changes with modern communications technologies? So that's really one of my big asks, along with the fact that as you go and make your decisions going forward, that ability to innovate on this stuff is actually something we protect, because it's where the next sort of generation of reporting and awareness and information products come from. Because the transition from everyday news through to new technologies is huge and accelerating. I mean, I think the Pew Internet Life Study was that up to 1/3 or more of people under the age of 30 didn't watch any TV news at all yesterday. Right? Now, in an emergency, thank God, people are actually tuning in even more to authoritative sources. But I think that's a trend that we can't decide ahead of time how we deal with it. We have to innovate as we go along.
Thank you.
Well, because we are a local station, as Chuck mentioned, we do have a number of public affairs shows. We do give a lot of preparedness information out to people ahead of time. In the weeks before the storm, coincidentally, not because we knew there was a hurricane coming, we organized a symposium on Long Island, which is particularly susceptible to storms, for the county executives of Nassau and Suffolk County on emergency weather procedures, with all our meteorologists present and news people present to discuss emergency preparation. And then obviously before the storm. I think, it is a frustration sometimes when we tell people, public officials tell people, you should evacuate, you shouldn't be there, you should leave. Not everybody does. Part of the concern here was we had Hurricane Irene almost exactly a year ago, which did not translate into as large of a storm surge or area here. It dramatically impacted people upstate. But I think that was part. My guess is the next hurricane that's headed here, you'll get a much greater public response just based on people's experiences.
Thanks. In terms of what the FCC might do, I think we've demonstrated the importance of radio and the ubiquity of radio in these times of crisis, encouraging the wireless carriers to activate an FM chip so that radio would be available even if other forms were not. I think that would be really important. And then one of the things that we've done is to try and learn from each experience. I mentioned earlier we have these local preparedness plans, and one of the benefits that we have from being in a number of markets is that we can share those experiences, and we've already had sort of post crisis summits where we've shared the information about what worked, what didn't work, what we should do differently, what we would want to do better in terms of alerting people, better in terms of providing relief.
Great, thank you all very much.
Thank you very much to all the panelists. We really appreciate your insights. Thanks for coming here today. And with that, we'll wrap up this panel. Thank you to the interpreters as well. And let me call up Sean Lev, who's the General Counsel of the FCC, who will moderate the next panel. Thank you very much.
Short one, Commissioner. Can everyone hear me? I'm Sean Lev. I'm the General Counsel of the FCC. And this is our fourth panel on Outside the Box, New Ideas to Improve Communication Services. Before we turn to the panel, I need to make one announcement. Apparently we're having on our video feed some problems with our closed captioning. We're going to make sure that is fixed and post the entire video as closed captioned as soon as we have that fixed, so that those with hearing impairments will be able to hear or be able to participate or see everything that's occurred today. So this is our fourth panel. I want to introduce our panelists very quickly, and then we'll get right to it. Bill Smith is the President of Network Operations for AT&T. Professor Shiv Panwar is a Professor of Electrical Engineering at Polytechnic Institute of New York University. Brian Fonts is the CEO of the National Emergency Number Association. Paul Rotella is the President and CEO of the New Jersey Broadcasters Association. And David Dodd is the Chief Information Officer of the Stevens Institute of Technology, which is our host today. Thank you very much. So without further ado, let me just get right to the questioning. We're going to follow the same basic form that we've followed all day. I'm going to ask one question to each panelist. They'll have 5 minutes to respond to that question. Then I'll turn over the questioning to the commissioners, who each also have 5 minutes for questioning. So let me start with Bill Smith from AT&T. Mr. Smith, one of the key reasons we're here today is to understand the lessons that we learned from Superstorm Sandy. Can you describe the lessons AT&T has learned, and in particular, if there are any game-changing or technologies that AT&T sees coming online that may improve response in the future?
Certainly. Let me begin by thanking the Commission for having us here and discussing this very important topic. I've been involved in some way or fashion in just about every hurricane since Hugo in '89 in some form or another, and we take our responsibility very seriously. In fact, at AT&T we say that before people want water, food, or shelter, they want to communicate, and that's one of the first things we focus on. And we learn from every one of these events and add some plays to our playbook. I think each one is unique, or at least every one I've been involved in has some unique characteristic, and different disasters have unique characteristics. For example, an earthquake or tornado is a different response plan than dealing with a hurricane. So we try and learn and build our capabilities in every case. So first of all, what happened in this one, I think it reinforced a lot of our response plans. They went very well, from our advanced planning to our pre-staging of sails on wheels or sails on light trucks, also known as colts and cows. The preparation of bringing and pre-staging generators, the industry coordination that we had. Facility sharing between carriers worked well, as did the mutual aid responsibilities there. A number of things. Our fueling plan worked very well. We pre-staged over 100,000 gallons of fuel and ultimately used almost 500,000 gallons of fuel, refueling our generators and actually providing generator or fuel for our employees so they could get back and forth to work. A new thing we did this time was working on setting up the charging stations. We actually coordinated in New York with the mayor's office and provided stations associated with the disaster relief locations, and that worked very well. Opportunities, I think clearly hardening the transport infrastructure is something we continue to work on. About 2/3 of the outages that we had in our network, in our mobility network, were as a result of losing the transport connection. That is the facility that connects the cell tower itself back into the core network. Without that, you can't communicate. There's nothing to bring back to carry the signal back into the network. So in doing that, we look at things like microwave systems. In Manhattan, we turned up several microwave systems. In New Jersey and Long Island, the colts and cows are typically connected with either a satellite link or a microwave system. So we're actually adding some of those systems to our arsenal, so we've got more capacity there. We're looking at some free space optic systems. Think about that as the fiber optic system without the fiber, so you can point the transmitter and the receiver at one another and transmit a signal. They're not effective over the long term or in many conditions, but for a short-term solution, those may work. In the power capabilities, we're looking at both fuel cells and additional generator systems. They're not foolproof. There's a lot of discussion around diesel generators versus natural gas generators versus fuel cells. They all have pros. They all have vulnerabilities. So I think it's important to look at each one of the cases. So in closing, I would just say I think it's important for us to remember expectations. I've seen a lot of these. I've been on a lot of coastlines after a storm. Mother Nature can be pretty powerful. And I remember those massive concrete bridge sections between Slidell, Louisiana and New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. They were tossed like matchsticks. Imagine the kind of infrastructure you have to build to withstand that force, and then think about whether you want one in your neighborhood or not. So I think we have to keep expectations reasonable about what can be done there, but constantly learn ways to make the infrastructure more resilient. Secondly, I think we need to avoid one-size-fits-all solutions. There's a lot of debate after Superstorm Sandy about natural gas generators or diesel generators. In many events, such as earthquakes, one of the first things that typically happens is shut down the natural gas network. Even after Superstorm Sandy, in some of the areas where homes were knocked off their foundations, the natural gas network was shut down, so you can't assume a natural gas generator is always going to be fail-safe. So I think you have to be custom and look at the right solution for the right problem. And last but not least, I think we need to be careful about doing anything that undermines the mutual aid in the industry. One of the things that I've been very proud about in my time in this industry is that we always came to the aid of one another and helped during a time of crisis. This is a very competitive industry, and I think we need to be careful not to do anything that undermines the willingness of carriers to come together to help one another and avoid things that make that become a competitive issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Turning to Professor Panwar. So this panel is about new ideas. I'm wondering what, from your perspective, are new ideas that may help response in the future to events like the ones we saw this fall.
Again, thank you to the commissioners for this opportunity to present these views, and good afternoon to all of you. I'd like to take up a theme that Bill mentioned at the end of his presentation, that of mutual aid or cooperation between cellular providers. We've done some work which shows that if two cellular providers, identical in terms of their services, their spectrum availability, number of customers, if you merge their capabilities, you get not a doubling, but a fourfold increase in their capacity. Put it another way, if half the cell towers of each of the carriers were destroyed, if you merge the capabilities of the two carriers, you would be able to maintain near normal service. So this is as a result of the fact that in the US, unlike parts of Europe, carriers maintained their own cell towers. And that is the key to why this works. So in terms of crisis, in terms of after an event like Sandy, if you could facilitate all the carriers pooling their resources in terms of the air link, spectrum, and backhaul, this would be a great mechanism to restore service. Now, for the first time after many years, we have this opportunity now to do this because all the carriers are all converging to 4G LTE, the fourth generation LTE technologies. As a result, what AT&T and T-Mobile did during Sandy would be possible to do across all carriers in the near future as they move to 4G technology. This would require mainly changes in software and some minor tweaks in the system, so this is pretty cost effective as well. So this is one specific idea for the future, I think, that I would mention. The second one, which is related, is using a technology called femtocells, which are these tiny cells that are just beginning to become common. I think if the carriers very aggressively push these femtocells to their residential small business users, make it very low cost and available, then these two could be in essence small cell towers, because residential users are now investing in generators, alternate power sources as we see around us. So in essence, you could form islands of connectivity using this technology and the ISPs, which residential and small business users. So again, we are using the diversity of infrastructure from internet service providers. It could be a cable TV provider providing the backhaul in essence, or AT&T or Verizon through their competing services, along with residential femtocells. So this is another way where if these femtocells are allowed to be open, right, unlike Wi-Fi, which unfortunately is more and more closed because people's fears about their system being hacked, if these could be opened either remotely or otherwise, this could be another mechanism to restore service. And I think the FCC, if they set up the right regulatory structure, this could be done relatively easily. Thanks.
Thank you. Turning to Mr. Fonts, your organization specializes in 911 and emergency response. What do you see as the obstacles, both for the general public and harder-to-reach populations, including the deaf and hard-of-hearing population, to connect and receive emergency assistance in a time of emergency? And what do you see as the technology or policy solutions coming online that may help?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the question. Thank you, commissioners, for holding the hearing and for the Institute for setting up such a remarkable setting as this to discuss the important issues that this panel is designed to talk about, and that is thinking outside of the box. I represent the 911 industry, and one of the things that we need to do to move this forward is to move our 911 centers across the nation into 21st century technology. Much of what exists out there is last century technology. Today, with 104% wireless penetration, with the growth of smartphone technology, people wish to be able to communicate in all forms of voice, video, data, etc. And depending on your provider, you can do some of those concurrently. So the goal is to try to provide information-rich technology and sources of information for those 911 centers. The key drivers, if you will, is really to provide the consumer with emergency services using the originating service provider that they would prefer. And particularly as it relates to the issue of Superstorm Sandy and any other disaster, is to improve the system resilience and survivability. And as importantly, as you begin the process of serving the public, it will help improve the interoperability and information sharing between public safety services. I should say between and among public safety services. There are definitely consumer benefits. When you think of the over 400,000 individuals who dial 911 each day, we are trying to move into a 911 environment that will allow the use of text messaging to enable communications. Today, there are over 34 million Americans who are deaf, hard of hearing, or who have speech impediments, and rely almost exclusively with today's technology of texting and with the messaging platforms that will be delivered in more advanced networks. The ability to send photos, video, and other file information to 911 centers is critically important, particularly when you get into information regarding your own individual health that you wish to provide to those who will ultimately be responding to your emergency situation. In the next generation 911 center, you will be able to automatically receive information pertaining to telematics and other sensor data available out there to improve the response and to tailor the response to the unique need. We will be able to provide services that enable individuals to communicate in a variety of languages. For the PSAP, the Public Safety Answering Point, the 911 Center, this will allow for the opportunity to involve specialists in audio and video communications to get more robust and advanced location data, automate some of the call handling processes, operate from mobile and nomadic workstations, and this is critically important in disaster recovery areas. Vermont was a state who deployed next generation like services throughout the state after Hurricane Irene hit Vermont. There was significant flooding. One of their call centers was damaged by the flooding, yet no 911 call went unanswered. The ability to move those 911 calls throughout the state was critically important to maintain that service. You'll be able to route calls based on a variety of policy issues established by the PSATs themselves. And now for those who respond to the emergency situations, one thing I'd like to state very clearly, right now we're in the development of what is called FirstNet, and that is the wireless public safety broadband network. Critical, and it should be instrumental in the initial discussion of the technological aspects of that network, is how next generation 911 is going to be factored into that network so that communication basically moves from the individual to the 911 center to the first responders seamlessly. In Canada, they're in the process of developing their public safety broadband network and have stated through documents that 911 and the I3 standard associated with next generation will be front and center in their deployment and development of their broadband network, and we should be doing the same here. There's a lot of work that has been done in next generation 911. It's designed to best serve the public and to do so with the ability to provide for efficient and effective responses to emergency situations. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very helpful. Mr. Rotella, we We've heard a lot today about how broadcasters responded to Hurricane Sandy and the important role that they played in ensuring the safety of the public during natural disasters. In planning for the next storm, what steps can broadcasters take to be better prepared and to improve their performance in this regard?
Well, Seth, first, obviously, I'd like to thank the chairman and the commissioners here. I appreciate the importance that you've shown to our industry, and certainly for the opportunity to be in this panel today. So thank you very much, as well as our hosts here at Stevens and my fellow panelists and the staff and the ladies and gentlemen here today. We have a unique role in our responsibility as first informers, first responders, as the people who have the microphone. I heard it mentioned a moment ago that there's a trend that most young people are getting their information from other sources than broadcast. But we are the loyal friend that's there when you need us, and that's the one thing I can say New Jersey broadcasters are most proud of. When the power's out and when the internet's down and when the cable's down and when you can't get any kind of information from a television because there's no electricity, radio's always on. If radio was invented today, it would be nothing less than considered the miracle technology. Think about it. For a couple dollars, you can buy this little machine. There's no download fees. There's no monthly charges. You have access to hundreds of different outlets for information, for entertainment, and it can fit in your pocket or in a woman's purse. It can go anywhere, and it costs maybe pennies a year to run, and you always have access to it. In New Jersey, what we did, I think the most important word in your question, Seth, was preparation. Our stations went into prep mode, as you heard our colleagues talk before. I know a lot of our managers and our key staff went right to the stations 2 days before the storm hit. They brought sleeping bags, they brought provisions. A lot got stuck there, but they actually, in one instance, by the way, our chairman is here from the NJBA, Dan Finn from Greater Media. They actually had to relocate down the block to an area because their primary office got flooded out, and they literally picked everything up and moved down. And holding the antenna, I think Dan, you had it in your hand while you're moving along, keeping the stations on the air. And you also adapted your formats so that at every stop set you had information going out to the general public, to the listening audiences we serve. And that's something that's really important, especially in New Jersey. We have a very diverse and I think robust listening population that gets the New Jersey information from New Jersey local radio. You saw that with Governor Christie and with the different people who called in. In Atlantic City, I can think of one example during the last Hurricane Irene, where the mayor actually told his police officers to listen to the radio for information because the information they were getting from that source was more timely and accurate than what was being sent over the wire on their little communications networks. So we take that role very seriously. Preparation is going to be key. I think, by being part of the New Jersey Broadcaster Association, our members, there are benefits to it. We encourage and we provide free ABIP inspections. Mr. Chairman, the ABIP program is so important. That's the Alternate Broadcaster Inspection Program. And that also, not just so much from the things that people talk about in the industry or public files and stuff, but it makes sure that things are working properly. You're not waiting to have a reaction. You're being anticipatory. You're being proactive. And you make sure the equipment's in place. So we provide that service for free, so all our members can take advantage of it. There's nothing that would stop them from doing that. So I hope we can continue that program. I also think that in the future, we're going to have to look at providing a first response, a first informer type of bill. I'm going to ask the state legislature to introduce that kind of legislation that we have in Nevada and that we have in Illinois that just got passed, to create a first responders classification for broadcasters. My good friend Dave Turetsky, Dave and I went to high school together. He graduated a year ahead of me. As you can see, he's still a year ahead of me at least. But Dave and I were on the phone till 1, 2 in the morning during the crisis. And we used our local resources with your information to put people in touch with things they needed, like fuel and how could we respond to generators, things like that. One of the problems we had wasn't at the national federal level, not the FCC or even with FEMA, but we had or with our state police. We had problems with local law enforcement in some ways where we do all this work. Dave and I would get everything approved, and then at that last level, all of a sudden someone didn't get the word. Also access. I think by having that first informer, first responder bill in place, That's going to help out because a lot of broadcasters said they couldn't get through. The National Guard was great. The state police are great. We get to a local cop and he wouldn't know what the essential personnel card meant. So hopefully we get this legislation through. That's something that we will continue to do. Also, I think we've got to make sure that preparation is something that we live and breathe by every day when looking at our stations, our transmitter sites, as well as our broadcast studios. And with the help of the FCC and with our strong broadcaster associations, the leadership we have in New Jersey, we'll keep doing it. Thank you.
Thank you. Finally, David Dodd from Stevens, right here. So Stevens experienced the storm firsthand, and I know you are a core part of the community, as we heard earlier. Can you help us understand the effects that the storm had here, how you responded to it, and lessons other institutions like yours, institutions of higher learning or other large institutions, can draw from what your experience was?
Certainly, and good afternoon, and thank you, Mr. Lev and Commissioners. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today, but more importantly, for your work and diligence in these hearings. I'd like to take you through some of the experience that we had in order to answer the questions about lessons learned. I'd like to provide a context for you. So let me take you through, if I could, some of the experiences that we had here at Stevens. We, of course, knew that a storm was coming. After Hurricane Katrina and what happened in the Gulf, most businesses and public sector organizations, including colleges and universities, became far more serious about disaster recovery, business continuity, crisis response. Stevens had certainly done that as well. And so when the storm was coming, we were upholding our responsibility to our students, not only for education, but more importantly for their safety. And we had started to tell them to take steps to make sure you're safe. If you can go home, perhaps you should do that. But of course, Stevens is a large international university. We have students here from multiple nations. So we will have a population, as most schools do, who will remain on campus. So therefore, it is critically important to recognize that for schools, for hospitals and others, you're going to have people in different places by nature of the situation and the type of disaster, frankly, that you have. Stevens also, I think, as is true for the vast majority of organizations in this country, has followed essentially a traditional model with regard to business continuity planning, which is to have a center, a data center on campus that provides mission-critical communications and computing systems, and then to have a backup location, a satellite location where that is the case as well. And I think that one of the lessons we learned is that that's become highly problematic. Superstorm Sandy is called a superstorm for a number of reasons, including the fact that it was 1,100 miles wide at landfall, therefore the largest Atlantic hurricane on record. It didn't just impact what I've been through in North Carolina. As I was telling one of the commissioners, this was not just a hurricane. This was an extraordinary event. And so one of the things that we did is then, in addition to communicating with our students, tried to ensure the operational integrity of our data center, which is in the basement of our library building. We also tried to ensure that our telecommunications, our phone system at another building were ready to go, that our internet links were ready as well. We felt pretty good about that, but I will tell you, when you're looking at the TV and you're seeing an unprecedented storm bearing down on you, you realize the tenuousness of this situation. And as our provost said earlier, when he talked about the fact that we managed to get through this storm and continued our critical communications, it was not by virtue of a very elegant design of that system. Quite frankly, we almost lost our internet links. Our system stayed up, so we are using our student information system to identify, locate, ensure the security and safety of all of our students. We're using our human resource system to ensure the safety, the location, the disposition of all of our employees. We are using our residence life system to know where students are staying on campus or in apartments around Hoboken as well. So we're becoming very well aware of the fact that these information systems are critical to us at a time like this. We're also continuing to communicate through email and through our website and through emergency notification systems, which did not fail, but I will have to tell you that it was through the extraordinary efforts of two individuals who, when one of our generators failed, iteratively took UPS batteries from one building to another, got them recharged and carried them back to continue to power our internet link. So I am saying again that you become very well aware of how tenuous these situations, these capabilities are in the face of a disaster. One of the things I guess I would say that we've learned is that and let me just take you through, I actually thought of some of these things earlier, so let me take you through what I think some of the lessons are that are particularly relevant. Superstorm Sandy was an extraordinary severe weather event, but I think the reality in the age of global warming is that we will inevitably have more of these. And I think it's critical to note that Superstorm Sandy and other events that are likely to occur will be regional and not localized events. And so I think that's something we have to pay particular attention to. Therefore, the models of having a primary location for your operations, for your communications and computing, and having a backup location are probably now, those traditional models are probably out of date. We have to seriously reconsider those models. Even if we have been part of the New Jersey Educational System Disaster Recovery Alliance, that program, because this storm is affecting New Jersey itself, is highly problematic because this storm was very, very large. The lines blur. It used to be people thought of disasters and then post-disaster recovery, and I think one of the things we've learned is that those lines are now blurred. You need your critical systems, your critical communication systems before, during, and after these things occur. And so one of the things that we've started to do in terms of lessons for us that I think is extremely important to others is we have completely sort of fundamentally rethought the reliance on communication and computing systems here on campus. And we're looking now to a more strategic use of the web and hosting these systems in other locations, which, if you're dealing with key partners, also have redundancy built into their models as well. So for Amazon Cloud Services, Google Cloud Services, that redundancy is now a global capability as well. And so for our financial system, which is hosted in Arizona, also has redundancy through locations throughout the world. I'll add real quickly because my time is up. It was noted in a previous session that 25% of cell phone coverage failed during the disaster. I think that's significant, but what I find more significant is that 75% of those then stayed up. I say that because if you have a cell phone in these commercial carriers, you can post to content on web pages, you can access these communication systems, and even if those systems are not on site, you can continue this very critical communication that has to continue to occur through these large disasters. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now we'll turn to our commissioners, and we'll start with Commissioner Kleiber.
Thank you, Mr. Lev. Two of the takeaways that I think I have today, particularly with this panel, which is the subtitle is "It's Outside of the Box," which I really think is appropriate, is how necessary it is for all of us to adjust to the new norms that was so aptly coined or recoined earlier today. And as Mr. Hogan said earlier, what our obligations are as, and I quote, first informers. And this panel, to me, the underpinning that, as affirmed by you is just so significant. So I wanted to start with Mr. Fonts. When we talk about the evolutions as it relates to in the communications space, and it was mentioned a few times today about next generation 911. I particularly, again, it's been a recurring theme with me. It is so important when we talk about those 54 million Americans with disabilities. How could this NG 911, if we have ubiquitous footprint, how could this have helped with those with hearing and sight disabilities particularly?
Sure. And there are a few other things that need to be done in addition to just NG 911.
Absolutely.
Again, for David's comment about the 75% of the wireless network that remained up and running, that's clearly a very good point and particularly essential if you're going to be able to communicate to anyone, particularly those who, in the case of 34 million Americans who are deaf, hard of hearing, or speech impaired, this provides them with the standard means of communications through primarily texting. And again, just a little footnote to the opportunity for texting, the agreement that was reached between public safety and the 4 largest carriers in rolling out both bounce back capabilities as to when a text message is unavailable at a particular 911 center, and then when the networks themselves will provision texting to 911 later in 2014. So as those steps take place on the network side, on the PSAP side of the equation, the 911 center side of the equation, particularly with the deployment of next generation 911, the capabilities of receiving text messages on any platform and the opportunity to move those text messages around to those who may be more specialized within the 911 center community will be able to respond more effectively and perhaps best to those individual needs.
Thank you. Mr. Rotella, you shared with us some of the experiences you have had, as a broadcaster, and the others. I can visualize you carrying around an antenna. Sounds like something I would do. And but I know you had some difficulties, transitioning from AC to DC power. But you used an all-hands-on approach that, whether you're talking about generators, gasoline and the like, special alerts, you talk about sleeping bags, all of the things it took, all of the inputs it took. To on-air talent as well as general managers coming into place. Can you give us again a bit more clarity about why the passion towards this type of delivery? Why is it so important?
Why? Well, anyone who's in radio or television or broadcast knows the passion, and I've heard that in the background of the commissioners. Every speech that I've been at, I've always heard something about how I got started in this business type of thing. And I think it goes for commercial and non-commercial, by the way. My next chairman, Scott Taylor, is here from a non-com 99.1 star, and also our educational stations. I think that's where it starts, by the way. And that's something we did in New Jersey. We started a student division of our NJBA. I think that's where the passion starts. And you live and breathe it. And once it bites you, it's like politics. Gordon Smith says he's a recovering politician. Maybe we're all recovering broadcasters. But if you touch it a little bit, it gets in your blood. But then you look at the responsibility we have. There's no other medium that's as closely identifiable or related to the audience than radio, I think. And even though I represent television, it's unique in radio. It's ubiquitous. And you think about our fellow New Jerseyans. Look, there were neighborhoods, there were communities that were destroyed. New Jersey, we lost, our shoreline. We lost our coast. We lost a good part of our economy. There's 42,000 New Jerseyans who are now displaced permanently. They're technically homeless. And one of the interesting things about radio is that when you're displaced, when you're in an apartment or you're in someone else's house or in a bedroom maybe, you can have a little radio there to get your information, as opposed to maybe not having access to television or cable or wherever you are. But it's very easy to get that information to you when you're in your car going to work. And then we talk about our friends with the cable and internet. And think about this passion. How many people called me and said, I'm in Michigan, but I was listening to the online feed of the station because my family's in New Jersey. I want to find out what's going on. And they were listening to an online feed of a New Jersey radio station. So, and I could go on, and I'm not going to take everyone's time up, but there's one thing that we should look at outside the box. There is new technology emerging, like putting the FM chip and lighting it up in a telephone. There's something called FM Alert. You're probably familiar with it down in Louisiana. It uses the ubiquitous FM frequencies to alert maybe special needs communities, to get that doorbell like the EAS does, get their attention, go listen, here, find out something's going on. I think the passion has to do with the closeness that we share with our audiences. We take it very seriously. The responsibility broadcasters have for the EAS and as first informers. There's not one person I know in my industry that casually takes an approach to that responsibility first. And I think it's just something that's innate. It gets into the bloodstream.
One of the things, and I will say, and I know I'm out of time, Sean, so one of the things I will say that kept my sanity during Hugo, when it was a lot of family members that we love each other, but we don't always like each other. Well, we were in that house with one bathroom for an extended period of time. One of the things that kept my sanity was WPL-AL radio station in Charleston. We had that battery-operated radio on. It was the only frequency we got. And I will affirm to you that if it weren't for that station, I might not be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rosenworcel.
Thank you all for being here today. Mr. Fonts, I want to start with you. I have seen public safety answering points, or 911 centers, that are as large as several football fields, with rows of operators taking phone calls. And I've also seen, in New Jersey no less, a public safety answering point with a single desk, one computer station. So we have more than 6,000 of these 911 centers across the country. As we migrate to the next generation 911 system you described in so much detail, do you think it's necessary that there's some consolidation? Would that facilitate it, or would that be to its detriment?
No, I think already consolidation is taking place in the 911 industry. I was just on a panel this past week with a gentleman from Indiana who, within Indiana, there's a state mandate that there could only be 2 911 centers per county, and basically to ensure redundancy, et cetera. You're going to see a natural evolution, in large part due to the advances in technology that allows for sharing of information, GIS information, and other location types of data services. And you're also going to then be able to, through that, look at other cost savings and opportunities to operate in a virtual environment. And so you look out in rural areas particularly, the old brick and mortar 911 center with that one desk may in fact now be consolidated, or that 911 center physically may no longer be necessary as that person is doing the work from that rural location. And so we're going to see inevitably, with the advances in technology and the deployment of next generation 911 and the economies and the efficiencies associated with that, the translation into the possibility of the reduction of the number of 911 centers that exist.
Mr. Smith, my question's for you. You talked in some detail about mutual aid and how in the aftermath of the storm, carriers work together in a competitive industry to try to make sure that their subscribers were able to make phone calls. You also said that we should make sure that we don't take steps to prohibit that. So I'm going to ask you to elaborate and say, are there specific things that we should or should not do in order to make sure that kind of culture of mutual aid happens after a disaster?
Sure. I worry about getting explicit in publishing data carrier by carrier. And there's been discussion about that. And in my career, I have always felt that my colleagues and the network experts with other companies, we work together. And we work together without the fear that the next day there were going to be rankings published somewhere that says this carrier is a little better than that carrier. And we actually even saw a bit of that with Superstorm Sandy. And you know, I actually had drive tests done throughout the area, so I knew every day where things stood with respective carriers. Let's just be careful that we don't do anything that takes, a very competitive environment and causes people not to want to do that. We opened up this time, as you know, we shared with T-Mobile because we had compatible technologies. We loaned equipment trailers to another provider who lost equipment in a building in Manhattan and needed capabilities. We did that freely. We did that, very willingly, but we did it without fear that it was going to be used against us the next day in a competitive environment. So I just ask that we be thoughtful of that.
Mr. Rotella, you talked about first responder status for broadcasters, and you specifically mentioned legislation in Nevada and Illinois. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that means and what benefits would flow to broadcasters and ultimately to the public were you to have that status?
Awareness and education, really important. First of all, by having that status, now you have the imprimatur of authority. The state would actually, aside from the Police Association, the NJBA, you'd actually have some kind of a credential that we would make sure, and something I'm going to introduce in the legislation, include rather, that there's a component of education required before you can become certified as a first responder. A lot of times, this last crisis, my colleagues from ABC New York and CBS, they were calling me up and I had to prepare quick cards for them, literally faxing them to them and emailing, because they were getting thrown out of their areas in Point Pleasant where they were trying to broadcast. And we did that with some friends in cable, too, to try to establish that. So by getting an awareness out officially from the state police, from the federal agencies, right down to county and local law enforcement, and again, awareness and education on that level, too, so that when a broadcaster comes by and says, listen, my transmitter site is 2 blocks away. It's going to be underwater in an hour. I have to get through. Or, as you heard before, we have a truck full of gasoline. One of the things David and I talked about at 1 o'clock in the morning, a little non-com station needed 10 gallons of gasoline for the generator, and there was no physical way to do that. And Scott, one of the competitors, actually said, I know that station. I can get 10 gallons of gas. I'll get in my car and go. Now, think about it. It's 1 o'clock in the morning. You're not supposed to really out. And he's doing, God's work, literally, to get that other station up and running so their listeners can tune in and hear the information they need. So I think that's the key, Commissioner. Education on our level, education on the public's level, education on law enforcement community's level, and then to have that official designation attached to it so that there's an awareness and a respect for the work that we have to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Pai.
Thank you, Sean, and thanks to all the witnesses. My first question is for Mr. Smith. One of the statements you made in your remarks was that microwave systems hold particular potential for enhancing resiliency. I was wondering if you could expound on that and tell us from a technical and policy perspective why that is so.
First and foremost, having the physical connectivity is better from a bandwidth point of view. The reality is the average cell site today is carrying a tremendous amount of data, far beyond. If you think of a cell site that has LTE, 3G, 2G capacity, it's not unusual to have 200 megabits per second of capacity minimum to one of those sites. You generally can't provide quite that capacity with microwave systems, but they are a good short-term solution. So, for example, in Manhattan, the morning of November 1st, we were setting up a microwave shot from a rooftop location on at one building to the Thomas Street building where we could get a direct connection because we knew the transport facilities feeding that rooftop location were going to be out of service for quite some time. So it's a short-term location. That was unlicensed spectrum. Manhattan is not the cleanest RF environment in the world, so it takes a while to get them going, but it is a tool in our toolkit. And as I mentioned, we're looking at free space optic. They're not an ideal solution for the long term, but in a crisis, you do a lot of things that aren't ideal and try and get service restored and then get back to full operating mode as soon as possible.
Thanks. And if I could ask a follow-up question, which doesn't necessarily relate to what you commented on, but one of AT&T's solutions that I was interested in is the Emergency Services Internet Protocol-Based Network, or ESINet. And I was wondering, I understand it's been deployed in some places like Hardin County, Tennessee. I was wondering if you could describe some of the details of ESINet and what that portends for a more broadly deployed next-generation network.
I can give a little information. I don't know, Brian, do you want to go into more detail? You're very familiar with that.
Sure. In the 911 space, particularly, we've been working on standards to ensure an IP-capable communication systems within the 911 center, and that ability to communicate with external communication systems, whether it's legacy or new advanced IP networks. And the goal, of course, is to be able to provide the sharing of information, the pushing and pulling of data in a very timely fashion, and to be able to provide additional data points that were either not previously available or not readily available for not only the 911 center itself, but also for those who would be responding to a particular emergency. So it really does become what I call a communication hub rather than just the 911 center for public safety communications.
Right. Thanks. Professor Panwar, one of the things you discussed was the use of femtocells and other small cell elements to sort of revitalize the network architecture. That's something that we at the Commission have talked about a lot, is a richer, more textured wireless network architecture. One of the questions I had for you was how, short of mandating cooperation among the carriers, how should the FCC communicate to some of the carriers the need to cooperate in a way that doesn't, along the lines of what Mr. Smith's concern was earlier,
suggest the disclosure of confidential business information and other sensitive network details?
As I mentioned, somehow to encourage these femtocells there is a debate within the industry whether these will be closed or open. And to the extent that the FCC can tip the scales in favor of it remaining open, would help in that process. And I think along with their realization that aside from the competition issues, there are these events that would facilitate cooperation between different femtocells from different carriers serving their users across all the carriers.
Okay, thank you. And last question is for Mr. Rotella. You mentioned in your response that one of the calls you got was from somebody in Michigan who was listening online to a New Jersey station. And that led me to think about the online presence of New Jersey broadcasters generally. I was wondering if you could describe whether New Jersey broadcasters see an online presence as an increasingly integral part of the business, or are they still seeing it as sort of an ad hoc, useful adjunct in some cases?
It depends on how you approach it. First and foremost, we're broadcasters. But I look at broadcasting and I look at the internet, and I look at my computer as another stick, to use the vernacular, another antenna. When I'm up at my home in Pennsylvania, for example, I can listen to any of my New Jersey stations on my internet radios. As long as I have electricity. But that's the key, that we should not be afraid of distribution, whether it be through a satellite, through a landline, and I think our stations that get that remember they're broadcasters first, and they can use all these magnificent technologies to get their good content out to the listeners, then I think that's real valuable. I think if a broadcaster makes a mistake and says, you know what, I'm going to be focused on just one component, just like the FCC, I mean, you have a very diverse approach and respect for all these different technologies, and you appreciate them. I think broadcasters have to do the same thing. So if something emerges, I can hear, my favorite radio station in Florida right now. I can hear my favorite radio station in Nevada right now. But of course, I don't have to go anywhere because I can hear my favorite radio station in New Jersey all the time. But I think that's the important thing, that we respect it, we appreciate it, and know how to use it properly. I hope I answered your question.
Oh, you did. Yeah, thank you, and thank you, Sean.
Thank you. Chairman Janikowski.
Brian Ponce, let me start with you. I want to ask you to talk about how we get from here to there on next generation 911 and text to 911. We heard on the last panel a representative from the New York Fire Department who was their social media representative who was communicating with people on Twitter during the storm and was very concerned about making sure that they understood that she wasn't 911, and she was trying to balance that. And as we worked together with you and others on the recent text to 911 step forward, one of the challenges was we know we want to move to that world as quickly as possible, but until we're there, we want to be cautious with consumers about what they think is available. So I want to ask you to talk a little bit about how we manage that transition so we can do it as quickly as possible, and also what messages would you have for consumers on what they should do when and if the next storm hits?
Thank you. First off, what are the factors that will help facilitate the move to next generation 911? I think the first factor, and I want to thank you and your colleagues, is leadership. In recognizing what this means in terms of the American public's ability to receive responses with what I call information-rich data. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, oddly enough, I just had an opportunity to speak to all the state regulatory commissioners over the weekend, and there are still regulations out there across the country that were developed 40 years ago. And this is regulation that's no ill intent. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just that the regulations need to be updated to 21st century technology. And some of those regulations are thwarting or impeding the deployment of next generation 911. So we need to work closely with the state public utility commissions to ensure that the regulatory house is in order to help facilitate it. And then, of course, there's always the issue of funding. And that's an issue that will always be in the list of top three, if you will, of things that need to be done. With respect to the consuming public, I think the things that they need to be aware of is, first and foremost, you contribute to our nation's 911 systems in terms of 911 fees that are associated with your landline and wireless bill and VoIP bills. Be assured, check to make sure that money is in fact being used for 911 purposes. I think that your involvement or demand, in essence, for 911 to keep current in communications is critically important. It's kind of sad when our 911 centers are locked in a voice-centric world. Again, for those 43 million Americans who are deaf and hearing impaired, the efforts that are being made to provision texting to 911 is critically important. But it's essential that we have the same technology in our centers that you have in your fingertips and that first responders will eventually have at their fingertips. And we have to, as the first touch to public safety by so many people, remind our civic leaders, policymakers, et cetera, how valuable this service is. And there are many other elements in terms of educating the public as to the availability of advanced services, because to your question, Commissioner, with respect to the 6,000 PSAPs out there, they're not all going to make the jump to next generation at the same time. Now, several states have consolidated at the state level their management of 911 and are charting it out for their respective states, but that's not the case everywhere. So there has to be that constant education of the consuming public where advanced 911 systems actually are deployed.
Well, this is such an important topic, and we'll continue to work with you. And I think this is an area where, working with the broadcasters and the carriers, it's not acceptable to have a world where people can't send text to 911, and yet if the storm hits tomorrow, 911 isn't ready for it. And so I think we'll need all of us to work together to hasten the day when everyone can do that, while also keeping consumers from being confused. Let me, last question, because we're running out of time. Professor Panwar and Bill Smith, you both talked about 4G LTE. It's here. It's exciting. It's creating new opportunities that each of you alluded to. And I just wanted to ask each of you to make sure that we understand what the biggest opportunities from LTE are when we think about disasters and communications networks. And any specific suggestions on things that we should or shouldn't do, in addition to what we've heard already, to fully take advantage of 4G LTE to help apply the lessons we're learning as part of our work on Sandy.
Okay. So, as I mentioned, the greatest opportunity is that at long last, all the U.S. carriers are converging to one standard. I think that is a great opportunity for us for a variety of reasons, including recovery from disasters. What the potential barriers, and I think I would defer to Bill on some of these, is the mechanism should be set up perhaps before as a kind of a trial exercise across carriers to make sure there are no bugs in this stopping us from exploiting this and not having to wait for the next disaster to try it out. So I imagine things like the authentication and software which determines that you are a customer of a particular carrier can be shut off so that users from other carriers can use it, that the phones that they're issued can operate across the spectrum, not only in the piece of the spectrum associated with your particular carrier. These are the kind of detailed issues which need to be thought of and considered to really unlock this potential.
I don't think there's anything that comes to mind immediately that we would ask the FCC to do. There's a lot of work to make it work as seamlessly as we talk about the different spectrum bands being implemented, even different equipment manufacturers. So if one carrier's got manufacturer A in a market, the other carrier's got manufacturer B, making those networks talk instantly, seamlessly is not as simple as it sounds, but I think the industry, frankly, is in a good position to deal with those issues, and And I don't think there's anything that we would necessarily look to the FCC to do in that regard, not that come to mind immediately.
Well, thank you all very much. I think we've run out of time. We appreciate the input from each of you, from our other three panels today, and I just want to warn each of you that by signing up to participate in the panel today, you've also signed up for follow-up questions, and we want and need your ongoing engagement. These are such important issues for people everywhere, and we look forward to working with you. And I would say also, before I hand it back to Sean, we expect to have more hearings in other parts of the country, so other opportunities to delve deeper into some of these issues. This panel was on new ideas, thinking out of the box, and I think we got some very good ideas from this panel, but I think we're also still at the beginning of thinking about how can we turn some of these issues on their side and harness the opportunities of new technologies to respond to the issues that we saw in Sandy. So thank you very much, and thank you to my colleagues. And Sean, thank you.
Thank you. I think we are adjourned. Thank you very much to the panel. I know we all learned a great deal. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.